was not suitable for children. Today, I'm going to talk to you about a Pakistani serial killer called Javed Iqbal. Born in 1956, he was one of 4 boys and the 6th child in his family. His father, Mohammed Ali Mughal, was a wealthy trader. In 1978, he was enrolled at Islamia College and started up his own business while in college. His father bought 2 houses where Javed Iqbal would own and operate his steel recasting business. Outside of this, very little information is known about the man who would go on to become one of the most nightmarish killers the world has ever known. What makes Javed Iqbal stand out among other serial killers was not only the fact that he committed his crimes in Pakistan, a nation which yields an extremely small number of serial killers, but also his very high and unusual body count. Javed Iqbal killed exactly 100 children, not one more or less, but exactly 100. And he did that for a reason. Iqbal would later go on to tell the authorities and interviewers that he could have easily killed 500 or more children. But he stopped at 100 because that's what he'd promised himself that he would kill. Exactly 100 children. He wanted to keep his promise to himself. Once the twisted serial killer hit his mark, he would give up killing, which hints at how cold, uncaring, and calculated of a man Iqbal was. All the warning signs were there, and for the most part, everyone seemed to ignore them. After Iqbal's business life took off, accusations of rape, sodomy, and other sexual crimes would be lodged against him. But he managed to avoid arrest and jail time for the most part. One charge finally would stick, and Iqbal was sent to jail for an unknown length of time for rape for which he was convicted, though he professed his innocence. Javed Iqbal would later say that he had fantasized about murder for a long time, since childhood. However, he developed a tremendous urge to kill after being released from jail. His mother had died during his incarceration, and he also felt he'd been brutalized by the police. Javed and his mother were extremely close, and her death set him into a firestorm of rage and anger at the world, which he would take out in the absolute worst of ways. In a twisted and dark game of cat and mouse, Iqbal would offer young boys tokens for the video games at a discount, or sometimes for free. He would drop some money onto the floor and wait, watching for a boy to pick it up. Then, at some point, he would declare that his money had been stolen and search everyone. Then he would take the thief who picked up the money into a dark room and rape him. On occasion, he would feel bad and let the would-be victims go, even giving them the money back. Other times, they'd be taken to his villa, where they'd be strangled. In December 1999, Javed Iqbal decided to write a letter and tell of his crimes in detail, sending it both to the police and the local newspaper. He had kept detailed records of everything he had done, like many obsessive serial killers do, to sort of relive the experiences. Even this seemingly spontaneous act was coldly calculated. Iqbal had reached the 100 victims he promised himself, and had no need or want to continue his murderous rampage. This killer was ready to be caught. He didn't try to conceal his identity, but rather was making a full disclosure, public confession of his crimes, and tying them to himself. A manhunt followed. Javed Iqbal turned himself in at the offices of a newspaper called the Daily Jang on December 30th, and the police came to arrest him. A trial would follow over the coming months, which would turn up a lot of surprises along the way. Javed Iqbal had admitted to his murders openly, but when the time came for him to face the state, he withdrew his confession and claimed innocence. Iqbal claimed he was not guilty of the 100 murders he'd already confessed to in writing. He would go on to bizarrely explain that he made a false confession and had written the letter at some hybrid of political statement and art, making a statement about missing children and runaways, a group which nearly all of his victims belonged to. Their unimportant status is what allowed Iqbal to get away with his crimes for so long. Photographic evidence would be presented, as well as his 32-page journal in which he described the killings. This pretty much sealed the fate of Javed Iqbal. The records that Iqbal had kept would also come out as evidence during the trial, showing step by step the process used to murder the boys, whom this raving madman claimed as his victims and disposed of their bodies. He had written detailed descriptions of how he'd used vats of acid. Furthermore, 2 vats still containing human remains were found by police, further damning Iqbal at the trial. It is rare that serial killers act in the company of others, but this was the case with Javed Iqbal, who had not just one, but 3 accomplices in total. The mastermind behind one of the most brutal cases of murder in history didn't do it without help. But he didn't recruit adult men who could possibly turn him in. He needed people who would fall under his dark sphere of influence. He found that in runaway teenage boys, not unlike the ones he killed. Saeed Ahmed was just a 17-year-old boy, but was Iqbal's main accomplice nonetheless. 2 other youths were named as accomplices as well, and all 3 were brought to trial for the killing of the 100 boys. Mamad Nadim, aged 15, would be found guilty of 13 murders and receive a sentence of 14 years for each murder, for a total of 182 years. Mamad Zabir was only 13 years old upon sentencing and received a total of 63 years in prison for his deeds. Javed Iqbal was found guilty, just like his accomplices. The authorities weren't playing around, and it was ruled that Iqbal should die. In accordance with Sharia law, the judge in the case ruled that Javed should be killed the way he killed his victims, in a terrifying fashion. Javed Iqbal was sentenced to be strangled with the same chain he used on his victims. His body was to be cut into 100 pieces, one representing each boy, and then dipped into a vat of hydrochloric acid in front of the parents of the deceased. But this is a fate that Javed Iqbal would never live to see. Not because the Pakistani authorities halted it, but because of the actions of Iqbal himself. On October 8th, 2001, Javed Iqbal and his main accomplice, Saeed Ahmed, committed suicide in their shared jail cell while awaiting their fate. There were some questions as to whether the duo really committed suicide, or if the guards were so filled with disgust that they killed the 2 themselves. But this is mere speculation, and a question that the world will likely never have an answer to. In his house, police and reporters found bloodstains on the walls and floor with the chain on which Iqbal claimed to have strangled his victims. Photographs of many of his victims in plastic bags. These items were neatly labelled. 2 vats of acid with partially dissolved human remains were also left in the open for police to find, with a note claiming the bodies in the house have deliberately not been disposed of so that authorities will find them. Iqbal confessed in his letter that he had planned to drown himself in the Ravi River following his crimes, but after unsuccessfully dragging the river with nets, police launched what was at the time the largest manhunt Pakistan had ever witnessed. Though there had been speculations about his suicide, autopsies revealed that he had been beaten prior to death. Iqbal is considered the serial killer with the most victims in Pakistan's history as an independent nation. Parents of the missing children were contacted